everyone, welcome to a poker vlog with a bit of a difference. Poker with kids.
Fuck it, let's go. Don't tease me. Let's play some fucking cards. He beat me. Straight up. Pay him. Pay that man his money.
Welcome everyone to episode 3 of Poker with Kids. This time, something that I didn't think was going to happen for a while. I actually headed into Crown Casino and during the Aussie Millions. So this time we've got a bit of a look around Crown Casino as it's set up for the Aussie Millions. And then I get into some hands I played in a cash game there. So today's Australia Day and I'm in the car. My wife's had a bit of a change of heart. Her original plan of just sticking to poker in the local area, she's changed her mind, as she has a habit of doing, and she's decided that today, instead of my original plan was to actually host a small home game, that kind of fell through for a variety of reasons, and she's decided with the help of her mother to look after the kids today and send me off to Crown for the day. So yeah, that's what we're doing. We're on the way to Crown and it's Aussie Millions time, so hopefully while we're in there we'll be able to have a bit of a look around Crown, see how it's set up for the Aussie Millions, maybe even catch some of the tournament action in between my own cash game play. I'm not actually playing any events in the Aussie Millions this year. I have in the past, but this year the only two events that I'd actually consider playing in would be the horse or the gate game, and they've already happened. So congratulations to Sal Rivera, who won the horse, and Richard Aspie, who took out the 8 game only I think yesterday. So I'm on the way to Crown. Hopefully get a decent session in, although the tricky part is that it's early in the morning, something that poker players don't really do. So I've been given the must be home by 6:30, so not ideal hours for a poker session, but we'll see how we go, and hopefully we can have a good day at Crown, have a bit of a break from the kids for a while, which useful to get away, but yeah, miss the kids, but yeah, it's a day away, so see how we go. This section's the exhibition hall area where they have the some of the Aussie Millions tournaments running. I got there a bit earlier than day, so I couldn't actually get in to have a look around exhibition hall. But the entrance there you can see nicely styled up with the cards and chips and that type of thing. And they have around, I think it's 30-35 tables in the room, so pretty decent size for events that they can hold in there. Here we're just heading down the escalator to the main poker room, which is known as the Las Vegas room, even though not much else has to do with Las Vegas in there, but it's the obviously the association with Las Vegas and poker. It actually used to be part of the car park that got basically cordoned off and turned into a poker room. So this is where we're heading down to the basement. This is an area up on level 1 where they've opened up some more poker tables. They've put them up there for while the Aussie Millions are on, basically for lower stakes cash games. This area is the main floor of the poker room. You can see the registration desk at the back and cage towards the back there. In front of the cash game tables, which obviously for the bigger events uses tournament tables, and towards the back tournament tables. Over here, you're looking from the opposite end of the room. You're looking across the tournament sort of side of the room. The main tournament area is the lower level, and normally the upper level is used for high limit cash games. But again, during tournament time, it's used for tournaments. This is a quick shot looking over the feature table that they've got set up in the main room. Ordinarily there, instead of that sort of stage, there would be about 4 or 5 poker tables set up there, obviously with a bit of a media desk in front there for online coverage and that sort of thing. And this is the floor plan of the main poker room. You can see on the far right hand side they've got an area set up which they call Satellite Central, where they either run satellite events or another area for cash games. The section in between where the sort of the cage and registration desk is, and that Satellite Central area, is where they've got pit games, so roulette tables, craps table, blackjack tables, casino, all that sort of stuff. Then the main area to the left, you've got your what's normally your cash game tables, and the bottom left a bar area. The feature table on the lower left hand corner of the floor plan, and the top left hand side there you've got the main tournament area, and on the slightly raised area is again more tournament area, but ordinarily that's used for high limit cash games.
In the first significant hand of the session, I was on the button and looked out at 2 red kings, pretty nice hand to look down at. There were 3 limpers in front of me, and I decided to raise it up to $17. Got a call from the small blind as well as the 3 limpers, so 5 was to the flop, which is a pretty nice flop for my hand. It was King, Jack, 7, Rainbow. Obviously, top set, pretty good there. Obviously, the nuts at the moment. It's checked to me. Not overly draw heavy, although with a couple of Broadway cards there, I get the feeling that if someone's got a piece of the flop with a king or a jack or a draw, they're going to be calling. So I decided to bet $25, and no need to make a huge bet and scare people off. So bet at $25, got called by the small blind. The under the gun player who'd limped in folds, and then the hijack who'd also limped decided to shove for around $120. The cutoff who'd previously called folded. I decided to reshove. I had about 150 behind, so I shoved as well just to get heads up with the cut with the hijack. Small blind got out of the way, and we are obviously all in on the flop. Board ran out with a jack and a 6. I turned over my pocket kings, and king's 4 was good to win the hand. The other guy was a bit frustrated. He turned over, had king 7 of clubs for top and bottom pair, so had him almost drawing dead from the flop. So always a good way to start off the session with a hand like that and pick up some chips early. The next significant hand of the session, I was in middle position. There was a raise in front of me to $15 from the player under the gun +1, as well as a call from the player under the gun +2. I looked down at pocket 9s and decided to make the call, and the 3 of us saw a flop. And the flop came down pretty nicely for our hand, King 10, 9, Rainbow. Bottom set, but a very, very connected board. So there's a lot of cards that either are going to kill my hand or make very difficult for my opponents to put in money without a very strong hand themselves. And of course I could already be behind either with somebody having flopped the straight or with a higher set. So although chances are I'm in front, it is a little bit of a vulnerable hand. On the flop, the player who had raised pre-flop let out for $35. The undergun +2 player got out of the way, and I decided to raise to $90 again because it's a board where there's a lot of cards that, as I said, either kill my action or make my hand even more vulnerable. So looking to take the pot down pretty much as soon as I can, or hopefully not have any cards that are going to be something I'm not looking for. I don't really want to see a queen or a jack in particular. Ace or an 8 might make it difficult to get my opponent to put in money with a worse hand. So I'd really like to, even though I've got a very strong hand, I'd really like to get the hand over and done with rather than having to face bets and that kind of thing on all streets. Anyway, my opponent called and we saw a turn which was a 6 of clubs, and he checked it over to me. So with a pot of over $200 at the moment and a stack of, I had about 250 in my stack, I thought I might as well shove the 250 right away. Think betting anything smaller might price my opponent in, and as I said, there's a lot of cards I don't really want to see on the river. So shove for 250, my opponent folds and I took it down, so good to again win that hand. Just make it easy and flop a set, and makes this poker thing look pretty simple. The next hand was interesting, in particular the strange kind of line taken by my opponent in the hand. We had a limp under the gun and I was on the button and looked down at Jack 10 of hearts, so I decided to raise it to $12. Got a call from the big blind as well as the limper, so there were 3 of us to the flop, which was pretty nice for my hand. It was 9-8-4 with 2 diamonds and 1 heart, so obviously the open-ended straight draw, 2 overcards and a backdoor flush draw. So when the action checked to me, I was happy to bet $17. The big blind min raised. He actually put out $30, which the deal said he had to make up to 34 as a min raise, which is something I was a little bit confused about, in particular by what he did on the turn, but we'll get to that in a minute. The under the gun player folded, and of course I made the call. The turn brought the ace of hearts, and interestingly now he min raised me on the flop, but now he decided to check to me. So unless he's for some reason scared of the ace, I'm not sure why he would check raise me on the flop and then not lead the turn. So of course I've picked up extra equity with the ace of hearts giving me a flush draw as well, so I'm happy to check behind and see a free river. And conveniently enough for me, the river was the 5 of hearts giving me a flush, and this is where my opponent let out for 125 with only about 60 behind. So interesting that he checked back the turn, overbet the pot on the river, and only leave him with a relatively tiny amount behind. So obviously with the flush with the jack, the third nuts, I'm obviously going to put in a raise, so I did shove. Opponent only thought about it for a little bit and called. Obviously I tabled the jack 10 hearts and took the pot down with a flush. But a bit of an unusual line by my opponent there. I really can't think of a hand, at least that I'd play, where I'd be happy to min raise as a check raise on the flop and then not put out a bet, not lead the turn, particularly when an ace comes. So I really don't know what my opponent had in that hand. Obviously happy to get there with the flush and win the pot, and obviously give that my opponent put the whole stack in. Again, pretty happy to win the maximum on that one. So yeah, that worked out pretty well. This hand I'm in the big blind, and there's a raise from the button to $10. I look down at ace queen offsuit and decide to make the call. Although you can definitely make a case for 3-betting a hand like ace queen in that position from the big blind, I just find it difficult to play that hand out of position when a call from the button in that spot doesn't necessarily narrow their range too much. Obviously they could be on a steal and you might just take the hand down pre-flop, but if the button calls, it's really difficult to play that post-flop, I think, if you miss the flop. One of those ones where you're sort of guessing a bit of where you are in the hand, and that's not sort of what I like to do when I'm playing Hold'em. I'd rather have at least some idea of where I stand in the hand rather than playing this sort of guessing game in big pots and hoping I'm good. So I decided to just call and take a flop, and the flop's ace king 7, which looks like a pretty good flop for my hand, but as I'm not the pre-flop aggressor, I decided to check it over to the button and he bets $10. Again, I decide just to call, again taking a more sort of passive pot controlling type of line, although again a case could very well be made for raising either on the flop or even maybe leading out into the pre-flop raiser. But I decided to just check call at $10. The turn brought a 10, and again I decided to check it over to the button, who again bet $10. So just keeping the pot small, I just decided to make the call, and the river was another ace. So I've now got trip aces with obviously the queen kicker, which is the best trip aces you can have on that board. Obviously with the queen I've got a blocker to the straight, so I decided to lead on the river for $25, and my opponent had a little bit of a think and then raised to 100. And this is a situation which comes up a bit in no limit hold'em, particularly in low limit or lower limit games. River raises and the strength of them. This is where I think I really made a mistake. Obviously, I do have the best trip aces there is, but obviously I am behind the straight with the queen jack or obviously a full house. And for my opponent to raise on that river after the line I've taken, I think my hand's pretty face up as three aces of some variety. So to confidently raise the river against someone who is representing three aces, they'd really have to have three aces beaten. So I did actually end up making the call, and my opponent turned over pocket sevens for sevens full. But you could almost make a case for folding that hand there, because I really can't, obviously unless it's a complete bluff, there's really no value hands that you can be raising that beat my that don't beat my ace queen. Any hand the guy's going to be raising on the river has to be beating the three aces, either as a full house or a straight. So I think maybe I could have made a case for folding that river, but again I decided to make the call, got the bad news, and lost the pot. In this hand I decided to do something I don't normally do, and I limped into the pot from under the gun. I had pocket twos, and I had a couple of reasons for doing this. Obviously looking to see a flop, hopefully flop a set with pocket twos to try and win the pot, but also because the table had been playing fairly passively. There are a lot of hands that had been limped in, had people limping in pre-flop without anybody raising, and most of the players didn't seem to be overly observant in terms of taking advantage of players limping in early position. So the fact that it might have given away a bit of the strength or lack of strength of my hand didn't seem to be noticed by anybody else, and we ended up with 5 players going to the flop. And the flop turned out pretty nicely for my hand. It was Queen 9-2 with 2 hearts. So I let out for $10 and had 3 callers. Obviously, a lot of respect for my bets there on the flop, but also quite a number of draws. Obviously, you've got hearts, you've got straight draws there with the Queen 9. So a lot of possibilities there. And the turn was actually very, very nice. Turned out to be a very nice card for my hand. It was the Queen of Diamonds, and this time I bet $25. The player under the gun +1 shoved for around $70, then folded around to the big blind, who also shoved for around $60. I had them both covered, so I made the call. The river was a 5. Under the gun +1 showed King Queen offsuit. The big blind showed Queen 7, which meant that my pocket twos won with twos full of queens. So not a bad little pot to pick up with, and something a little bit different with limping in early position with a hand and getting paid off when it hit. In this hand, I'm in the big blind with 8-3 of spades, and there's 5 limpers to me, and we see a flop of 8-5-3 with 2 diamonds and 1 spade. So obviously a nice looking flop for my hand with top and bottom pair. So I decided to lead out for $11. It falls around to the low jack, who raises to $25, which it's an interesting play, and obviously starts to make me think about what type of hands he might have. There's a lot of possibilities that could be behind my hand where he might make this raise, maybe something like ace five of diamonds with the pair and a flush draw, something like that. Maybe he might have a hand like 3-5 and have bottom two pair rather than top and bottom as I have. But of course, there's other hands he could have that are better than mine that obviously he'd be happy to raise with ones like sets or top two pair. So again, with sort of something that sort of sits in the back of my mind in limp pots is the Doyle Brunsonism, the don't go broken in unraised pot. So with that, to some extent, with that in mind, I decided to make the call. We go see a turn, and the turn helps my hand. It's a 4 of spades, so it gives me a flush draw as well. I check it over to the low jack, who bets 35 this time. Of course, now with a spade draw to go with the top and bottom pair, I'm happy to make the call, although obviously with the board's got a bit more connected now, so more straight draws possible, and some straights have come in with the 4. So I am sort of being a little bit cautious in how I proceed. And then so like I said, I called the bet on the turn, and the river was a 5 of clubs. So pairing the board, counterfeiting my 2 pairs, so now I've got 8s and 5s rather than 8s and 3s. And again, I check it over to him. Again, I lose a lot of my showdown value with the board pairing, so I'm happy to check. And he quickly checks back and tables Jack 8 of clubs. So he just had top pair with an average kicker. He was happy to check raise the flop and obviously bet the turn and then slow down the river and just get to a showdown. But unfortunate river for me on that hand. But yeah, interesting to see how someone plays a hand again in unraised pot just with essentially bare top pair. He's happy to check raise an early position or someone leading out from the blinds. So unfortunately I lost that one, but those kind of things happen sometimes. This hand I decided to mix things up a bit and raised in the cutoff to $13 with 8-6 of spades. There was a limper in front of me, and the big blind and limper both decided to come along for the flop. And the flop was ace-king-9 with 2 clubs and 1 spade. And as the pre-flop aggressor, I think it's a pretty good board for me to c-bet. Obviously, I can very credibly represent the ace or king, and it makes it very difficult for players with small to medium pairs to continue in the hand. Even hands like 2 Broadway cards, like say Queen 10 or Jack 10, that have a gut shot, it's still very difficult for them to call with essentially only a gut shot draw, assuming that even if they do make a pair, that might not be good. So I decided to bet $20 when it's checked to me, and the big blind calls. Once the big blind calls the flop bet, I'm essentially giving up on the hand unless I somehow find a way to make a hand that's going to beat a pair of aces by the river. With that in mind, we see the turn, which is a 5 of clubs, which brings the flush in. The big blind again checks, and of course with essentially no showdown value, I'm happy to check behind. Don't think a bet's going to get through unless it's a really big bet, and I don't really think it's the type of one I want to guess where he might have the flush, even though I don't think he does. And he might even call me with an ace if he's feeling a bit stubborn. So I don't really want to put in a bet on the turn, so I just check it back. And the river is exactly the card I'm looking for, the 7 of spades, which gives me the nut straight on the board to the 9. Given what I said earlier, how I didn't think he had the flush based on what he did pre-flop and on the flop and turn, when he leads out for me on the river to $50, I'm really just trying to figure out how much he'll call in terms of a raise. Ultimately, I decided on 120 as my raise size, although in hindsight, given that he actually called fairly quickly, I think I probably could have made it a little bit bigger. But yeah, he called the raise when I made it 120. I happily tabled the 8-6 of spades. He looked a bit confused, a bit annoyed, and mucked his hand. So I'm assuming he had a hand like 2 pair or something like that. So nice to take down that hand when I really didn't have any business winning the hand at all. That's going to wrap up the review of hands from Crown and the session I played there on Australia Day. Ended up the session up $218, so not a bad session overall. A few other hands that I didn't cover where sort of things didn't run quite as well as they had been in the hands I did look at. But overall, very happy with the session. Hopefully I get another chance to get back there soon. although I suspect it'll mostly be local sort of pub and home games in the meantime. So look out for that kind of stuff in upcoming episodes.